Hey guys, welcome back to Teth and Props. Today I'm going to show you how I went about making my katana lightsaber with a custom acrylic blade. So there's a fine line between what's a just samurai sword katana that has a light up blade versus a lightsaber. So it's a thin line between the two, but I think this still counts as a lightsaber with a custom acrylic blade. Anyway, the first thing that I had to do was model this in Fusion 360. Really simple design. Katanas have quite an easy design to model, so not too much to do there. The next thing to do is to clean them up after they come off the printer. So I use a Anycubic Mono X printer. It's really good, it can print all these pieces in one go. So you want to clean them up with paper towel first and then clean them in some isopropyl alcohol to take off all the excess resin. So after you've cleaned all the parts, it's time to remove the supports that you use for printing. So just going with an X-Acto knife and a Stanley blade, you can just go around and chop off all the excess. So where the supports are, we'll leave little not so clean parts of the print, so you've got to make sure that you sand down those sections to make sure they're nice and smooth. So if you have a thicker section of supports, you might need to go in with a saw first and cut off the excess, but then you can go back with some sandpaper and sand it down flat. It's really important at this stage of the sanding process that you make sure that all the parts fit together nicely before you go on to the next section. So now it's time to start the most time-consuming part of the whole build, and that's doing the wrap on the handle of the sword. So firstly, I put down a layer of white leather. I didn't have ray skin, which typically katanas have, so white leather was a good substitute for that. And then it's going down and just wrapping the whole thing. This took about an hour to do all up, so it's slow and tedious, but in the end it's worth the results. So once the wrapping's all done, it's time to start painting the extra parts. So whenever you're painting 3D print, it's always important to put down a layer of primer first over the prints, followed by some gloss black, and then you go back with your metallic color. So I did primer, gloss black, and then gold on these pieces. Next thing to do is to start the weathering. So this is just a dark wash with some black acrylic. So you get your black acrylic paint, water it down slightly, cover all of the painted areas, and then go back with a dry paper towel and take off any excess. And this leaves black paint in all the nooks and crannies and makes it look nice and weathered. So one thing you have to do when you are doing the leather wrap is to make sure that you cut out the holes where the lightsaber buttons actually come through. So it's especially important when you're doing the wrap to make sure you use a lot of super glue around where the buttons are and where the holes are. So that means that the wrap is a lot stiffer around that area, and it means you can actually cut it out and it won't unravel itself. So just make sure when you're doing the wrap around the handle, make sure you put a lot of super glue around where the buttons are. Next, you can just take your LGT lightsaber core, slide it up the middle, and then using the charging cable definitely helps a lot to pull those buttons up and then put the screws in. So once you've finished installing the electronics, the pommel of the katana will slide directly over the end of the electronics core and hold itself on. The last thing to do in assembling the lightsaber is to just glue on the super part of the katana. So just use some super glue or epoxy glue and glue that in place. So now it's time to start working on the custom acrylic lightsaber blade. So this is 10mm thick acrylic sheet, which is cut out with a laser cutter in the specific shape of the katana blade. It has machine etching for that design down the middle of it, and now we're adding the bevel of the blade on the side with a belt sander. So I highly recommend using a belt sander for this stage. You could technically do this by hand, but you might not just get clean lines, and it's going to be a lot hard. It's going to take a really long time because acrylic's quite durable, so it takes a long time to remove that material to make the bevel. So when you're doing this, you just want to go slow and take your time and make sure you don't scratch anywhere that you don't want to scratch, because as soon as you scratch acrylic, you can't remove that. So you want to make sure that you just do the bevel and don't scratch anywhere else. So once the bevel's been added, it's time to just put the coupler on, and this is a mix of a 3D printed part as well as a cutoff of a 1-inch lightsaber blade. So when they're put together, the acrylic blade slides perfectly into the end of the lightsaber. So there it is, guys. That is the katana lightsaber with custom acrylic blade. Very happy with how this has turned out in the end, and I'm hoping you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.